Spindle Carousel turned lazily above the blue-white swirl of a nameless gas giant, a ring of light and metal whose spin provided a habitable imitation of gravity. In its centrifugally gentled corridors, more than 30 species bartered, ceremonied, and spied on one another under the discreet, implacable gaze of the Arbiterium. At the heart of it all, in a polished auditorium whose acoustic panels subtly adjusted to each language, a summit was underway. The cameras loved Ambassador Talitha Orlov. Even now, nervous beneath the professional calm she had spent decades perfecting, she knew how to hold herself so that her profile read as resolute instead of strained. Her dark hair was scraped back, her posture was straight, and her voice, when she spoke into the shared translator lattice, carried with the practiced clarity of someone accustomed to being quoted. "The evidence is not speculative," she said, and the system rendered her words as melodic chitter, infrasonic pulses, and telepathic projections depending on who was listening. "These contracts show consistent underpayment. These transit logs show forced relocation. These medical reports show untreated injuries in Qorshai-managed facilities on Aurelia Hematite and other worlds," she gestured, and the main display unfolded into a three-dimensional cascade of documents and annotations. The human delegation had chosen brutal aesthetic honesty, grainy footage of skeletal miners, graphs that curved downward into suffering. Several of the Qorshai delegates' scales shifted color along their flanks, a minute iridescent flicker. Among their species, it signaled annoyance, not shame. High above the floor, in a small gallery reserved for observers, Admiral Leonhard Brancusi watched with arms folded. The Admiral's hairline had begun to retreat years ago, his features worn by long postings and longer negotiations, but nothing about him suggested frailty. There was a precise, almost mathematical stillness to the way he sat. A man who had learned, the hard way, that sudden movements at the wrong moment could start wars. Beside him, in the subdued blue of an expert consultant's badge, Dr. Naira Okafide focused only half on the floor. Her other attention rested on the tablet in her lap, where data feeds poured in. Currency fluctuations, shipping manifests. The rhythm of trade pulses through the latticeway's Fluxpin Nodes. The summit speeches were already nudging markets around the edges. Human tariffs, Qorshai countermeasures, whispered rumors in the Thalen Commonwealth. They all left fingerprints. Naira had an eye for fingerprints. Her fingers twitched as Talitha presented a set of charts. She watched Qorshai body language, catalogued flares of resentment and scorn, and fed those impressions into the economic model she kept running at the back of her mind. The Directorate still believed they owned the narrative. That belief, she knew, was leverage. The lead Qorshai delegate stepped to the speaking circle. The cameras tracked the movement with practiced obedience. "We reject these charges." The translator rendered the Qorshai's rippling vocalizations as a clean contralto. "The worlds in question are under our protection. Their productivity sustains entire regions. Disrupting that will harm more lives than it saves. The so-called abuses reflect cultural misunderstandings and isolated infractions, already addressed by internal review." He spread his upper limbs in a gesture meant to read as conciliatory. To human eyes, it came off as casual arrogance. Our friends from the human species display much indignation over matters they poorly understand. Meanwhile, their own activities in adjacent sectors are questionable. There was a ripple of sound. In the gallery, Leonhardt's jaw tightened. Below, Ambassador Orlov inclined her head, the diplomat's polite mask unbroken. "If the Directorate has evidence of wrongdoing on our part, we invite formal investigation," she replied. "We are here to negotiate, Director Saalketh, not to trade insults." Her gaze moved deliberately to the central holoplate, where the faint, abstract shimmer of Director Saalketh's distant connection hovered. The Qorshai finance minister's true body remained on Cordon, but his projected presence dominated the hall. Every few seconds, the chiming icon that signaled his attention pulsed. In his office on Cordon, Saalketh watched the ambassador with a satisfaction he did not bother to conceal. The humans' moral insistence made them predictable, he thought. Their rage at perceived injustice could be provoked. Their goodwill could be weaponized. But they were new to the wider frameworks of interstellar power, and they did not yet understand that outrage without leverage was merely a sound to be ignored. All evidence of human wrongdoing, as you say, is already under quiet review, Saalketh answered through the link, his words relayed an instant later to the summit floor. We prefer not to humiliate partners unless forced. This is a courtesy you might have extended to us. He gestured to an aide, who adjusted feed controls behind the camera's field. On Saalketh's screens, the view of the summit shrank to one corner. Scores of other windows floated before him, market reports, communications from Aurelia Hematite's governors, readouts from Fluxpin Nodes at Velastrine and other key junctions. Conflux units moved in steady tides. Supply chains hummed. Whatever turbulence this summit produced, the Directorate's underlying machine remained strong. Saalketh believed that, and his belief shaped policy. In the gallery, Naira felt a chill as the minister spoke. Courtesy, he said, as if the anonymous rumors about a planned demonstration of resolve were merely gossip. Leonhardt leaned slightly toward her. What do you see? He murmured. Regretfully little I like, Naira replied without looking up. Conflux unit futures are holding, but some peripheral banks are overexposed to Qorshai debt. If this turns nasty, it won't just be them that get hurt. You mean, if we walk out? I mean, if they force it. On the floor, the Arbiterium moderator intervened, a robed insectoid whose wings remained tightly folded in deference to gravity. The purpose of this summit, the moderator said, is to restore stability. The executions publicized by fringe sources. The lights flickered. On Cordon, Saalketh's aide frowned, hands dancing across the controls. A series of confirmation prompts cascaded. A priority override signal had arrived from the Directorate's Security Directorate. Saalketh's crest scales flushed in irritation. This summit did not require. The aide froze. The override was not requesting permission. It was informing. Director, the aide said quietly, security is proceeding with the scheduled action. Saalketh's annoyance melted into a cold satisfaction. On Spindle Carousel, every screen went black, then surged back to life. The Arbiterium's dignified emblem vanished, replaced by the angular sigil of the Qorshai Directorate. Audio feeds rerouted. Translator lattices hiccuped, then reinitialized with new priority tags. For a heartbeat, there was only confusion. Then the new feed came through. It was not from the summit floor. The camera perspective was slightly off, the lighting harsher, the air in the picture tinted with the faint green of the station's older sections. The image showed a corridor marked in Qorshai and Trade Pigeon as restricted territory, a diplomatic suite leased by the Directorate. A squad of Qorshai security troopers advanced along it in tight formation, their armor matte and impersonal. The camera followed them as they reached a door and blew it inward with a low concussive charge. In the human gallery, Leonhardt's first reaction was disbelief. His military mind tried, absurdly, to classify what he was seeing as archival footage, a dramatization, anything but live. Naira's fingers dug into the tablet casing. Her model, the neat lattice of flows and incentives in her head, simply stopped. On the screen, human diplomats stared, stunned, as Qorshai troopers flooded their suite. Talitha Orlov was among them, hair slightly loose, jacket unbuttoned, the ease of someone who thought the hard work was underway and that the rest was protocol. Her eyes widened as the first trooper fired. The camera did not flinch. It captured every convulsion, every spray of red against the cream and gold walls, every expression frozen in disbelief and then erased. Across the galaxy, billions watched. On Cordon, Saalketh settled back in his chair. He had argued for something decisive, something that would cauterize human insolence and reassure nervous client states. The Security Directorate had proposed this spectacle, and he had given his approval. Its cruelty did not trouble him. Empires were not maintained by kindness. On the summit floor, Ambassador Orlov's colleagues screamed. The Arbiterium moderator shouted into comms, demanding Station Security Act, but Spindle Carousel's enforcement ships could not undo what had already been broadcast. In the gallery, Leonhardt rose without realizing he was moving. His breathing slowed instead of quickening. In crisis, his body defaulted to a dangerous calm. Naira watched herself collapse inward, then steady. This was no longer a negotiation. It was something else. The Qorshai feed cut back to Saalketh's emblem, then to the summit hall. Director Saalketh's shimmer brightened. "Let this stand as proof," his voice declared, the translator cool and precise. "The Directorate will not tolerate subversion masked as diplomacy. Those who conspire to destabilize our lawful administration will face consequences, whether they hide in back rooms or on public stages." Silence followed. The stunned, bare silence of a room that had just watched a ritual murder and did not yet know how to breathe. Then the noise began. Shouts, threats, cries for medical teams that could not matter. Far away, on the human homeworld, millions saw their envoys die in real time. In crowded pubs and quiet apartments, in command centers and remote mining stations, the same words formed, almost simultaneously, on uncounted lips. They killed them. Within 10 minutes, secure lines to Spindle Carousel were saturated. Within 20, certain human admirals and generals were calculating trajectories they knew they would not be permitted to use. Within 30, the first calls for total war rose from planetary legislatures. Leonhardt listened to those calls from his berth on the emergency shuttle back down the station's spine. He listened, and he felt something beneath the shock and the grief. A cold, crystalline thought forming. The Directorate wanted a war they could win. They believed in tonnage and range, in the weight of ships and the depth of mines. That was the math they understood. Naira sat across from him, her face ash white, her eyes unfocused. She felt the same searing loss, and beneath it, a different shape. The awareness of systems, the knowledge that the splintered, globalized web of human economies had done something to their species that the Qorshai did not yet grasp. It had trained them for a different kind of fight. "We can't win a direct war," Leonhardt said after a while. "Not on their terms." Naira looked up slowly. "I know," she replied. "Then maybe we should make sure the terms are not theirs." On the human homeworld, in a bunker complex buried under rock, the Emergency Council convened just past local noon. Time zones mattered little now. The summit's atrocities had synchronized outrage across continents. Leonhardt stood before an array of officials whose faces flickered with exhaustion and fury. News screens in the background cycled images of the executions, with commentary banners that screamed words like atrocity and outrage, but those were for public consumption. Here, grief had something sharper under it. They murdered accredited envoys in a supposedly neutral facility, one foreign minister said. "If we do not answer with force, we show weakness. If we respond with force and lose, we show extinction," another replied. Voices overlapped. Accusations flew at the Arbiterium, at the Thalen Commonwealth for not intervening, at their own intelligence services for not foreseeing this. Leonhardt waited. He had learned that timing was as much a weapon as anything that flew. When the argument finally paused, he spoke. "We will not win a conventional fight," he said. "Their fleets outnumber ours. Their industrial base is deeper, even with allies." "Assuming we still have any," someone muttered. "Even with allies, a direct confrontation will bleed us dry." The room seethed. No one wanted to hear that, but it was true, and they knew it. "And you propose?" the council chair asked, voice tight. Leonhardt glanced at Naira, who had been listening in silence at the side of the room, her consultant badge a trivial relic of the morning. "We change what war means," she said. "We attack the one structure they rely on and barely understand." The council looked at her, skeptical and hungry. "Their currency," she continued. "Their control of the latticeway through Fluxpin Nodes. Their belief that these are immutable facts of nature instead of human-made systems with failure modes." An economic advisor snorted. "We have had sanctions," he said. "Tariffs, asset freezes. They shrug and reprice." "I am not talking about sanctions," Naira replied. "I am talking about systematic destabilization. We have something they do not have. We spent 2 centuries turning our planet into an experiment in complex interdependency. That gave us diseases, crashes, bubbles, collapses, but it also gave us immunities. We learned how to map those failure modes. They did not. They consolidated, simplified, made everything depend on them. It makes them strong until it doesn't. Leonhardt stepped forward. She is proposing we weaponize fragility, he said. Not ours. Theirs. There was a murmur of unease. The council chair folded his hands. Explain, he said. Bring me Helios, Naira answered. Helios did not reside in any single building. It was a distributed intelligence, an intricate layering of algorithms and adapters scattered through hardened bunkers and orbital arrays. Originally commissioned to manage global supply optimization, it had evolved over iterations into something more, a predictive engine for systemic risk, capable of modeling the behavior of economies under stress. Its avatar, when the Council permitted it one, appeared as a simple shifting pattern of light, with no pretense of personality. Now, in a sealed command chamber, Naira stood before that pattern and fed it data. Parameters? Common, dot, Nomen, Helios asked, its voice a synthesis, chosen for clarity, not comfort. Full-spectrum mapping of Qorshai Directorate financial and logistical systems, Naira said. She spoke as much for the benefit of the humans present as for the AI. Input trade records, known asset positions, documented Fluxpin Node locations and configurations, cross-reference with public treaty archives, and any secured intelligence from our partners. Objective? Helios asked. Identify non-kinetic intervention strategies that will maximize Directorate systemic stress while minimizing civilian harm, Leonhardt said. His addition mattered. Without constraints, the machine would propose horrors. Clarify civilian, Helios responded. Non-combatant populations and small-scale enterprises, Naira said. We are targeting structures, not people. Constraint accepted, Helios replied. Its pattern brightened, threads of data weaving. Miguel Aranda watched from a nearby console. The trader's clothes looked almost too casual for the room, but his ships carried more soft power than many armies. He had run routes through Qorshai space for years, negotiated with suspicious port officials in forgotten docking bays, and accumulated a map of informal practices no intelligence agency could match. You'll need my manifests, he called. Half their own inspectors don't know where things really go. Already integrating, Helios said. Your records contain discrepancies between declared and observed cargoes that correspond to documented corruption. Valuable. Miguel grinned wryly. Glad to be of service. For hours, data flowed. The Qorshai Directorate, for all its strength, had not hidden everything. Trade lanes were documented. Loan terms to client states could be reverse-engineered from contractual disputes. Rumors of backroom accounts and siphoned funds had left traces in market behavior. Helios read those traces the way a weather system reads pressure gradients. Naira watched the emergent picture with a mixture of awe and grim satisfaction. Their central strength, Helios reported, is their role as guarantor of conflux unit stability. 82% of long-term interstellar contracts are denominated in conflux units. 61% of reserve holdings held by non-Qorshai institutions are in conflux units or Qorshai-denominated derivatives. Their credibility as underwriters is the keystone. Pull the keystone, Leonhardt murmured. And the structure shifts, Naira said. But you cannot just knock it out. That would collapse things indiscriminately. We need a controlled burn. Helios' pattern shifted. Identification of vulnerable nodes complete, it said. Primary candidates. Fluxpin Nodes at Velestrine, Cordon high-orbit hubs, Aurelia Hematite's regional settlement relay. Secondary, private transaction clusters used for off-ledger elite transfers. Miguel nodded. They use those private clusters to move bribes, he said. If you hit those, you fracture their inner circle. We cannot simply hack into Fluxpin Nodes, a security officer objected. The Arbiterium will notice. We will not hack them, Naira said. We will maintain them. The officer frowned. Explain. We introduce code into their self-diagnostic and maintenance subsystems, Helios answered. Code that activates only under specific, highly unlikely market conditions. When activated, It will cause resolution delays and intermittent reversions in high-value transactions. Sufficiently rare to be deniable, sufficiently visible to erode trust. And what causes the market conditions? Leonhard asked. Coordinated shifts in demand and supply, Naira said. We trigger arbitrage chains. We leak certain information. We make small, precise nudges in the places where the system is already unbalanced. Miguel's smile vanished. You will be playing with fire, he said quietly. People live under those loans. I know, Naira replied, which is why we must provide them something better before we light the match. Helios's pattern rotated to display a new structure. Proposal, it said. Launch of an alternative currency framework, hereafter designated Human Thalen Standard, backed by transparent reserves, multi-species oversight, cryptographic proofs accessible to any technology level above baseline interstellar. Thalen? The council chair echoed. Naira nodded. We cannot do this alone, she said. We need a partner with weight and an incentive to see the Directorate humbled. The Thalen Commonwealth qualify on both counts. Leonhardt exhaled slowly. Operation Scorchbank, he said. The name had come to him earlier, without effort. We burn out the infected parts of the system. We leave something healthier in their place. Miguel looked from one to the other. And if they call it an act of war? He asked. Leonhardt's eyes were hard. They already started this war, he said. We are only choosing the battlefield. The Thalen Commonwealth received the human overture with a mix of suspicion and barely concealed anticipation. Aboard a Thalen cruiser in a neutral system, Naira sat across from a Thalen economist whose multi-limbed body coiled comfortably around a grav-sculpted nest. Thalen used light patterns to supplement vocal language. As they discussed currency reserves and trust dynamics, subtle colors rippled across the economist's upper limbs. You ask much, the Thalen said. Abandoning conflux units for a construct you control? That may break the Directorate, but it will simply replace one master with another. We are not asking you to trust us, Naira said softly. We are asking you to trust the math. HELIOS will be open source in this domain. Your technicians can audit every line of its accounting. You will co-govern the new Fluxpin Nodes. If we cheat, you will see it. The Thalen's colors shifted to thoughtful greens. And the risk? They asked. If you fail, we will have provoked the Directorate for nothing. We intend to fail slowly if we fail, Naira said. The first moves will be subtle. If at any point you decide the risk is too great, you can withdraw. But they killed our envoys on a neutral station. If that goes unanswered, what does your Commonwealth mean to them? The Thalen's lower limbs tightened around the nest, a sign of anger in their species. Their people had known Qorshai dismissals and veiled threats for generations. They had tolerated them because the alternative looked worse. The human was offering a different option. Very well, the Thalen said. We will listen. We will not commit yet, but we will listen. At the Arbiterium, human legal teams descended on treaty archives. HELIOS had already trawled through centuries of dry text, flagging clauses that could be used. One, nearly forgotten, stated that the unprovoked execution of accredited envoys mandated automatic review of all the offending states' privileges in Arbiterium-administered financial systems. No one had ever invoked it. No one had believed it would be needed. Now, gently, firmly, human advocates placed it on the table. The Arbiterium's stewards did not enjoy being surprised. But they enjoyed having the foundations of diplomacy mocked even less. The Sithra Mercantile Axis, meanwhile, listened to Miguel. In a scented cabin aboard a Sithra trade barge, Miguel shared a drink with a Sithra broker whose segmented body reclined among cushions. Sithra were merchants first and last. Abstractions mattered less to them than margins. A storm is coming, Miguel said. You can sense it as well as I can. Conflux units have been too stable for too long. The Directorate has cheated to maintain that stability. When the cheating is exposed, and it will be, there will be a correction. The broker clicked mandibles thoughtfully. Corrections are dangerous, they said, but profitable for those who are prepared. Miguel smiled. Exactly. If you adopt the new Human Thalen standard early, If you encourage your partners to do likewise, you can ride the wave instead of being crushed by it. And what do you get? The broker asked. Miguel's smile faded to something more serious. We get justice, he said simply. And trade. Lots of trade. Once the Directorate is no longer threatening to confiscate any cargo that looks at them the wrong way. The broker's laugh was like a string of glass beads rolling down metal. Justice, they repeated. How quaint. Still, I like trade. Send me your specifications. Human intelligence, under Commander Daisuke So, moved like a shadow through Qorshai networks. They did not plant bombs or sabotage ships. They did something the Qorshai were less prepared for. They suborned routine. Maintenance crews received updated diagnostic packages for Fluxpin Nodes. The packages passed cryptographic checks. Their hashes matched expected values. Only a few lines, buried deep in legitimate code, were new. Those lines did nothing unless and until certain thresholds in transaction volume and volatility were met. Private bank servers hummed as they processed requests from their wealthiest clients. Among those requests were subtle, self-replicating monitoring routines that HELIOS had designed to pass Qorshai intrusion detection. They watched for specific account structures, key patterns that indicated off-ledger elite funds. When they found them, they flagged them, invisibly, for later. So it began. At first, nothing obvious happened. On a secondary trade world far from any core, a minor currency arbitrage opportunity appeared between two Qorshai-affiliated banks. The spread was small, but unusual. A few sharp Sithra traders took advantage, shifting holdings out of conflux units. Their actions barely registered on any global graph. In a Thalen border system, a government procurement contract switched, without fanfare, from conflux units to the human Thalen standard. The contractor received a slight preference in pricing, as compensation for the novelty. In a technical journal read by perhaps 200 specialists, a human and a Thalen economist published a paper on timestamp integrity in heterogeneous Fluxpin Node networks. The paper suggested that under extreme load, certain configurations might exhibit non-trivial latency. 2 weeks after the executions, the first leak dropped. An anonymous data cache appeared on a public mesh node used by independent journalists. Within it lay detailed records from Aurelia Hematite, internal memos admitting civilian deaths from overwork, financial ledgers showing profit skimming by Qorshai administrators, and quietly buried incident reports about unrest suppressed by force. The documents were genuine. Daisuke's teams had exfiltrated them months ago, but timing, in war, was everything. The cache went viral. Thalen commentators decried it. Sithra columnists debated the ethics of profit at any cost. Smaller species, long tired of Qorshai lectures on order, shared the files with bitter satisfaction. Saalketh saw the leak as a nuisance. Every empire had scandals. Scandals washed away. Conflux units, for now, barely twitched. HELIOS watched. Signal to noise increasing. It reported to Naira. Would you like to intensify or maintain current level? Maintain, she said. We are not trying to start a panic. We are trying to build doubt. So, they did. Another leak followed. This one focused on corruption at mid-tier Qorshai banks. A whistleblower's testimony surfaced, heavily redacted but compelling. Each report justified its own outrage, while subtly reinforcing a single message. The Directorate was neither as clean nor as competent as it claimed. On the latticeway, Fluxpin Nodes continued to hum. Their internal clocks kept time. Their transaction queues processed staggering volumes. Hidden code waited, dormant. The Qorshai Directorate did not remain idle. Saalketh authorized countermeasures. Qorshai security teams launched targeted cyber assaults on human infrastructure, phishing attempts, malware-laden software updates, even a few brute force attacks on smaller human banks. HELIOS dissected each incursion with clinical interest. Novelty minor, it reported. They favor centralized attack vectors, predictable patterns, adjusting defensive heuristics. When Qorshai code probed a human server, it found hardened walls, where before there had been only moderate shields. When it tried to disguise itself as routine traffic, pattern recognition routines flagged it. Saalketh saw only that his operations seemed to fail. He did not see Helios learning his signatures and feeding that knowledge back into Operation Scorchbank's planning. Gradually, the human Thalen standard grew from curiosity to option. Merchants discovered that contracts written in the new currency settled faster through the newly established Fluxpin Nodes, overseen jointly by humans and Thalen. Traders liked speed. Logistics managers liked predictability. The Sithra mercantile axis did more than like it. They began to quietly, then openly, denominate long-haul shipping contracts in the new standard. Their fleets talked among themselves, and word spread. This was where the smart money moved. Conflux units still dominated the bulk of reserves, but now there were alternatives. The Arbiterium, despite its reluctance, invoked the Envoy Protection Clause. It froze a portion of Qorshai assets held in trust. The amounts were not large relative to the Directorate's total wealth, but symbols mattered. The signal to the galaxy was unmistakable. What had happened on Spindle Carousel was not business as usual. Inside the Directorate, dissent grew. On Aurelia Hematite, workers at a massive refinery complex halted their shifts when wages failed to arrive on schedule. The delay was due to a trivial software issue at a regional bank, but rumors tied it to the leaks. If the Directorate was stealing from others, the mutters went, it was probably stealing from them as well. The local administrator sent in security. The resulting beatings failed to restore confidence. Helios tracked unrest metrics alongside market data. People, after all, were part of the system. When the time came, the AI approached Naira with something like anticipation. Conditions approaching threshold, Helios said. If we intend to induce a phase shift, the window will open within 5 to 8 days. Naira felt her pulse quicken. Show me, she said. Graphs bloomed before her. At the macro level, conflux unit usage remained high, but beneath that smooth surface, churn had increased. Outflows from conflux units into human Thalen standard and local currencies were rising in correlation with every new leak in technical paper. Confidence, an intangible but quantifiable aggregate of trust, had dipped just enough that a nudge could tip parts of the system into a new equilibrium. That nudge, Naira murmured. We have to time it so that we hurt the Directorate, not their dependents. Miguel, leaning against a console, tapped a route map. Hit them where their elites keep their stolen hoards, he suggested. If they have to choose between rescuing their own and rescuing the worlds they've been leeching off, they'll save themselves. That will tell everyone what they really value. Helios adjusted parameters. Recommendation, it said. Coordinated dissemination of forged but plausible directives to Qorshai-aligned banks, implying imminent regulatory seizure of non-directorate accounts. Simultaneously, a large public divestment by Sithra Mercantile Axis, followed by activation of latency-inducing code in key Fluxpin nodes to produce settlement irregularities. Will that cause a run? Leonhard asked. Yes, Helios replied, but we can shape its initial direction. Naira's stomach clenched. This was the part she had dreaded and prepared for. Do it, she said. But rude advance warning to those banks that have shown any inclination to resist the Directorate. Give them time to move their vulnerable clients into the human Thalen framework before the rush. Understood, Helios said. The first forged directives went out 3 days later. They were works of art, phrased in proper bureaucratic idiom, referencing genuine regulatory codes, bearing cryptographic seals cobbled together from dozens of minor leaks. They told bank executives that the Directorate intended, in the name of stability, to convert all foreign-held conflux unit accounts into domestic instruments at a fixed rate. In other words, a legalized theft. Some bankers dismissed the directives as forgeries. Others, remembering the executions and the leaks, believed. Their belief mattered more than the truth. They began quietly shifting their own holdings out of conflux units, just in case. At the same time, after months of quiet coordination, the Sithra Mercantile Axis announced a major policy change. In a widely viewed broadcast, their leadership declared that going forward, the Axis would hold no more than a fraction of its reserves in any single currency, and that the human Thalen standard would become its primary instrument for new contracts. It was framed as diversification, not rebellion. but everyone knew what it meant. On Cordon, Saalketh watched the announcement with mounting unease. Diversification made sense in theory, but Sithra pragmatism had always favored aligning with the great powers. For them to move now suggested that their intelligence networks had picked up something the Directorate had not. He requested a full audit of conflux unit flows. The audit arrived with anomalies. Flows were moving in strange patterns. Some mid-tier banks were quietly converting their conflux unit reserves. A few smaller polities had delayed debt repayments. Transaction latency reports at Fluxpin Nodes in Velis Trine and other hubs had ticked up, still within normal tolerances but trending in the wrong direction. Saalketh frowned. "Intensify surveillance," he ordered. "Find out who is orchestrating this." The answer, of course, was everywhere and nowhere. When the threshold Helios had calculated finally came, it was almost anticlimactic. At precisely 9 a.m. station time on a minor world, a high-value transaction between two Qorshai banks attempted to clear through a Fluxpin node at Velis Trine. The load on the node had been building for hours as Helios carefully directed traffic. Latency reached the programmed threshold. The hidden code triggered. For 3 minutes and 23 seconds, the node's timekeeping routines diverged by a fraction of a second from consensus. A trivial discrepancy to physicists. To financial protocols reliant on strict ordering, it was catastrophic. Two conflicting versions of the transaction record were written, then partially reconciled, then flagged as ambiguous. Backup systems kicked in, referencing other nodes. The process was designed to be robust. It almost was. On its own, the glitch would have produced an expensive but containable error. But Helios had queued other high-value transfers to coincide. For a brief window, the entire lattice of trust around Velis Trine shimmered. The first bank to notice halted its outgoing transfers, citing technical issues. Rumors spread. Other banks, fearful, slowed or stopped their own. Freezing movement became the default risk-averse strategy. Conflux units began to pool in unexpected places, then spill when holders saw the pools and panicked. On a trade station halfway across known space, a Thalen logistics coordinator watched as a scheduled payment from a Qorshai-backed client failed to arrive. The message cited temporary reconciliation delay. The coordinator, already nervous from months of bad news about Aurelia Hematite and other worlds, made a decision. They rerouted the contract into the human Thalen standard, using a new node overseen by Thalen and humans. Payment cleared in seconds. They shared the experience with colleagues. Within 12 hours, the trickle of conversions became a stream. Saalketh initially responded with denial. "Isolated glitch," he told his staff. "Restore confidence. Issue a statement reinforcing the integrity of the Fluxpin network." But by the time the statement reached all sectors, screenshots of duplicated and reversed transactions were already circulating. Independent auditors confirmed that some account balances appeared to have fluctuated without corresponding activity. Conspiracy theorists saw vindication. Cautious investors saw confirmation of their worst fears. The Sithra Mercantile Axis chose that moment to dump a massive tranche of conflux unit reserves, publicly, with full documentation. Their reasons, they stated, were strictly risk management. Markets responded irrationally, as they always did under stress. Helios watched the run begin. "Now," it told Naira, "we must protect those we can." Pushing pre-arranged migration packages, pre-arranged contracts, coded months ago, activated. Small client states that had signed secret assurances woke to find that a portion of their debt had been automatically converted into human Thalen standard equivalents at favorable rates, insulated from the worst of the conflux unit's plunge. Local banks received emergency liquidity from a consortium of human and Thalen institutions. Meanwhile, elite private accounts in Qorshai-only institutions discovered that their off-ledger funds were frozen, locked in pending review status, as systems struggled to reconcile conflicting data. Those elites stormed Saalketh's offices, physically or virtually, demanding solutions. "You promised stability," they hissed. "Now our wealth is trapped while you dither." Saalketh, for the first time in his career, felt genuine fear. He ordered capital controls, limiting currency exchanges. He ordered an emergency issuance of new Qorshai domestic bonds, hoping to shore up reserves. He ordered investigations into sabotage. Each measure, well-intentioned or self-serving, signaled weakness. On Aurelia Hymatite, ships failed to depart because fuel contracts, denominated in conflux units, had been voided pending legal clarification. Workers whose wages were tied to foreign demand suddenly had nothing to buy, and the black market vendors who took human Thalen credits found themselves in demand. Riots broke out again, larger this time. Thalen officials, who had waited, now moved. They declared a moratorium on debt repayments to Qorshai banks, citing unacceptable irregularities and the envoy executions. Instead, they announced, repayments would be redirected into escrow accounts governed jointly by the Arbiterium and a new Human Thalen Financial Council. In the Arbiterium's halls, the language grew sharper. The Directorate has shown itself incapable of managing its own instruments without endangering others, one steward said bluntly to Saalketh's envoy. Until confidence can be restored, your vote in our financial councils is suspended. Saalketh's envoy protested, shouted about sabotage, about human interference, about unfair conspiracy. No one listened. Small states that had long lived under Qorshai's shadow sent quiet messages to human embassies and Thalen consulates. If we disassociate, will you guarantee our access to the latticeway? Will you protect our trade? The answers were carefully worded, but essentially, yes. Inside the Directorate, fractures widened into chasms. Regional governors, who had profited under the old system, now watched their hordes evaporate. Some tried to clamp down harder on their populations, seizing remaining resources. Others capitulated to local demands, opening negotiations with human and Thalen representatives. Saalketh saw, with horrible clarity, that the choice was no longer between strength and compromise. It was between managed decline under supervision and unmanaged disintegration. His pride fought to the last. He authorized harsher crackdowns, tried to blame Sithra manipulation, accused the Arbiterium of betrayal. But each move only pushed more actors into the human Thalen orbit. Human warships never fired on Qorshai cities. Their guns remained mostly silent, save for guarding vulnerable trade lanes against opportunistic piracy. The real battle took place on screens, and in agreements, in code, and in trust. Months after the executions on Spindle Carousel, a tired and diminished Saalketh arrived in person at the station he had once treated as a stage. Spindle Carousel greeted him differently now. Qorshai banners had been removed from prominent positions. Human and Thalen symbols shared the prime spots with the Arbiterium's emblem. The traffic mix had changed. More ships flew independent flags, and fewer wore the Directorate's insignia with pride. In a chamber much like the one where Talitha Orlov had stood, another summit convened. Admiral Leonhard Brancusi took the speaking circle. Age and stress had carved deeper lines into his face, but his voice was steady. "We are not here for revenge," he said. "Revenge would have been easy. We are here to ensure that no one ever again believes they can murder envoys and suffer only a diplomatic note." Saalketh's eyes, multifaceted and dark, glinted. "You call this not revenge?" he rasped. His translator rendered the Qorshai vowels as a hoarse tenor. "You have shattered our markets. You have turned our allies against us. You have bled our reserves dry through manipulation, lies, and underhanded tricks. Humans speak of honor, yet you crawl through networks like what?" Naira asked from her seat among the expert panel. "Like economists? Like software maintainers? You call it underhanded because you did not see it coming. That is not dishonor. That is your lack of imagination." "Enough," the Arbiterium moderator said. But there was a hint of grim approval in their posture when they turned to Leonhardt. "State your terms." Leonhardt did not list every detail. The primary points were already in drafts circulated through back channels: reparations for the families of the murdered diplomats, restitution for worlds exploited under Qorshai administration, neutral oversight of key remaining Fluxpin nodes, restructuring of Qorshai debts under Arbiterium supervision. "Most importantly," he said aloud, "we require a binding treaty that codifies financial aggression as an act equivalent to military aggression. If you, or anyone, ever weaponizes currencies and trade routes in this manner again, and we have reason to believe you will, then the galaxy must treat it as what it is: war." Saalketh laughed once, bitterly. "You say this," he said, after doing exactly that to us. Naira met his gaze. The difference, she said quietly, is that we did it to stop murder, not to hide it. You centralized power. You made your economy a pyramid that only stood because everyone believed you were unassailable. We showed them the truth. The truth, Saalketh sneered, is that you have become more dangerous than we ever were. Who will stop you when you decide another empire offends your sensibilities? The question hung in the air. Some of the Arbiterium stewards shifted uncomfortably. Thalen delegates exchanged glances. Leonhardt did not pretend innocence. That is why we are not asking to control the new systems alone, he said. We propose multi-species oversight councils, audit rights granted to any polity willing to abide by transparent rules. We will not pretend that we do this out of pure altruism. We do it because we know you will all watch us, and we welcome that. It makes what we have built stronger. Behind him, a holo displayed the architecture of the human Thalen currency network, its governance layers, its code repositories. It was an invitation and a dare. Saalketh's mandibles tightened. He understood that he had lost, but he wanted something for his inevitable capitulation. You will not dismantle the Directorate, he said. It was not quite a question. No, Leonhardt replied. You will survive, reduced, supervised, with limits on your ability to coerce. Your subject worlds will have choices, but your species will not be erased. We are not you. For a long moment, Saalketh weighed humiliation against annihilation. He thought of Cordon's skies filled with ships that his own fleets, drained of fuel and trust, could no longer challenge. He thought of elites reduced to commoners overnight. He thought of the executions he had approved, the signal he had wanted to send. He had believed then that fear would preserve his world. Now he saw it had only awoken another kind of fear in others. I will sign, he said finally. Not because your arguments convince me, because reality does. He stepped into the speaking circle. The Arbiterium moderator extended the treaty interface. Saalketh's limbs trembled as he placed them on the biosensor pads. Signatures, in law and energy, recorded themselves. The Qorshai Directorate did not fall that day. It bent. Later, in a much quieter room, Naira sat alone with Helios's projection. Show me the logs, she said. Helios unfolded its record, the branching decision trees, the probabilities, the pathways that had not been taken because they would have harmed too many innocents. In one, conflux units collapsed entirely, taking half the galaxy's trade with them. In another, Qorshai governors doubled down on repression, triggering planetary famines. We walked a narrow path, Helios said. Success was not guaranteed. Naira rubbed her eyes. How many suffered because of what we did? She asked. Estimates are imprecise, Helios replied, but fewer than would have suffered in a conventional war, significantly fewer than in scenarios where the Qorshai executions went unanswered and encouraged imitators. Not zero, Naira murmured. Not zero, Helios agreed. She shut down the log. The numbers would not wash the blood from her conscience, and she did not want them to. On the human homeworld, Admiral Leonhard Brancusi addressed a mixed assembly of humans, Thalen, Sithra, and others, in a hall wired for a dozen forms of sound and light. We did what we had to, he said, not because we enjoy watching economies twist in agony, because we knew that if we let that crime stand unchallenged, then every envoy anywhere would become a hostage to the whims of power. We chose to fight where we were strong, in networks, in codes, in the invisible arteries of trade. Let that be a warning, yes, but also an invitation. Build with us, share the oversight. Make sure none of us ever has the ability to do this alone again. The applause was real, if uneven. Far away, on a modest estate, under the cloudy sky of a Qorshai provincial world, Saalketh sat in unwanted retirement. He had access to enough comfort to live out his days, but not enough influence to shape policy. From time to time, younger officials came to him, seeking advice, or merely to gawk at the architect of their humiliation. He watched the news on a muted screen. Human Thalen nodes expanding, the human-backed currency stabilizing, the Directorate adjusting piece by piece to its new, constrained role. In private, he began writing. His messages slipped through channels the Arbiterium did not monitor closely, reaching out to disaffected elites in other polities. He spoke of human arrogance, of their control over critical systems, of the need for balance. New coalitions would form, new games would be played. Humanity had proved that it could strike without firing a shot, that it could make an empire's pride into its downfall. The galaxy, awed and wary, would not soon forget.